I was just saying with Jeff, I said, having offered you the open question, you went for the market reaction rather than the economic or the political as well. So from that, I'm extrapolating almost certainly wrongly that you don't see an economic or a political medium-term issue from the current situation.
Well, actually, that is the next step. So we'll see the market reaction first. But the next element to consider is that we have to remember the US stock market has been vastly outperforming the real economy. So we've seen fiscal and monetary stimulus propping up the market. And while we did see a dip in February, March, on the whole, stocks have regained all of their losses and are still growing. Now, that obviously is very much divorced from the real picture in the US economy. Now, while we've had this very ample fiscal and monetary stimulus, corporates have been continuing to take on more debt. We have to remember as well that the leveraged loan market, or the risky, kind of poorly rated corporate debt market, was already at about 47% of GDP prior to this crisis back in 2019, which is the level that we saw prior to the global financial crisis. So we were already in a very risky corporate debt market. We've seen corporates continuing to borrow. Now, if we were to see a big contraction in the stock market, for example, if Mr. Trump did start to show symptoms and there was real concern about the continuity of the administration, that could actually hit the bottom line, the market valuation of firms, and firms that are already overextended in a very uncertain period. And that could revive real concerns about a corporate debt bubble in the United States. That would be a massive setback for the economic recovery.
Cailin, can I come in and ask you around the sympathy vote? We've been discussing that this morning, whether you see that sort of reaction from voters. And what we had here in the UK with Boris Johnson, initially there was that sort of reaction as his ratings ticked high, but then fell over a slightly longer period of time. But if we think about the difference here, Boris Johnson, very similar in pushing back against the virus initially. But when he contracted coronavirus, we were still very much learning about the virus. It was in March, but this is like 7 months on. So President Trump clearly has a lot more information at his disposal, very strong messaging around the use of masks and how the pandemic will play out and whether it simply just disappears. So do you think he will get that sympathy vote enough so that it would move the needle on the election?
I hate to say this as a political commentator, I'm kind of undermining myself, but I don't think really that anything is going to have a big impact in terms of changing the polling numbers in favor of Trump or Biden at this point. There is definitely a possibility that we could have a little bit of a sympathy vote coming through for Trump. But again, as you noted, we've got a lot more information now, and Trump has had a very clear position on where he regards the risk coming from coronavirus, holding large in-person rallies, personally never really wearing a mask, and really kind of basing his campaign on the assumption that we're going to get through this quickly and it poses less of a risk than the rest of the world is telling you that it is. So I'm not sure, given his approach to the virus and whatnot, plus the fact that the US political spectrum is just so deeply polarized and entrenched, that will have any real sort of impact. Just to look back at his approval ratings from the entirety of his first term, to go through personal scandal, impeachment, robust economic growth, and then a severe economic crisis with differing opinions on how he's handled it, his public opinion rating has stayed almost fixed at between 40 to 43% of survey respondents. He is uniquely immune to changes in the political economic spectrum. And I'm not sure this is going to be anything different, to be honest.
Yeah, that's a very interesting word, immune, as you choose it carefully there, Cailin, because it leads me into my question. And you've partly addressed it, but I do wonder, the CEO of Pfizer was in a note to his own employees scathing of the debate. He called it disappointing. And as one of those companies that's involved in the development of a vaccine and a medical response here, he also expressed concern about the politicization of this process towards a vaccine and argued that it's undermining confidence in the resulting development of a vaccine. Does any of this change, do you think, in the context of the president now having tested positive?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think probably it will come down to how severe Mr. Trump's symptoms are, if he does have any. That might inform how he comes back out into the public sphere after gone through his 2-week quarantine period, and if he changes his approach to the virus. I think, though, he'll continue to have this very combative relationship with the pharma industry, mainly because we've seen, as you noted, pharma companies pushing back, wanting to encourage more caution to say that if and when we bring out a vaccine this year or next, it will be rigorously tested, and trying to instill more confidence in their own product. And to make sure that Americans are willing and happy to have it. We've seen mixed polling on that, but a growing percentage that are concerned about the kind of safety, if you will, of a vaccine. So I think Trump, from his side of the coin, will continue to, again, base his campaign on the expectation that this is a blip, that we're going to get through it. And he hasn't really proposed any economic policies to get us through the crisis. He's instead focusing on the brighter economic future based solely on a vaccine, allowing us to return to normal. So he's staked, to a certain extent, his political future on the rapid release of a vaccine. He'll continue to put pressure on pharma companies, and I don't really see that conflict dying down.
Cailin, good to have you with us, and thank you for the analysis.